Hello and welcome back, Michael, our masculine feminine energy expert, who has incredible value to offer when it comes to topics like relationships and love. Today we are talking about redefining love and what love actually means. So can't wait to hear your perspective.
Okay, yeah, really appreciate connecting with you as always. Defining love, we have multiple definitions of love, many different aspects and dimensions to it. However, one of the definitions I came across, which is so beautiful, written by Swami Krishna in his book Spiritual Warrior 2, Transforming Lust into Love, he mentioned how the definition of love is unmotivated service. Unmotivated service. What does that mean? It means that love isn't simply just chemistry or just magnetism or just a vibe or just that beautiful inner feeling of affection that we have between one another. Love is also shown through acts of service, through behavior. So for example, if you have a mother and a son and the mother says, oh, I really love my son, I really appreciate my son, but the mother's never there to take care of the son's needs or doesn't necessarily replace their uniform or doesn't feed the child, then we would obviously question the real love that the mother has for that child. So love isn't just a feeling, love is a verb. It's not just a description, it's also how you act and what you do with your life and how you're sacrificing your time, energy, and space to add to the vision, to add to the purpose, and to add value to that person's life.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. Just thinking about how sometimes, speaking about mothers and sons, right? I have a son, you know him. And there are days and sometimes even longer periods, especially with a teenager in the house, as you are interacting where you don't even particularly like each other. But it never means that I don't love my child. Like, he's the most important person in my life and I love him more than anyone else in the world. But yes, there are phases where I really don't like him. And I think that applies in all our relationships, doesn't it?
It's a good point. And it's great that you're defining, or let's say differentiating the difference between liking and loving.
I've learned that from him. I never knew that I could love a person, but at least for a while not like them. It actually took for him to be there and be of all of who he is for me to learn that lesson, thank God.
I really love that. I remember there was a time where one of my own masculine feminine teacher, he relays a story to me when he was walking among a community and there was like a kind of like wild argument between this man and woman. And he went over and he was like, he was kind of feeling a little bit despair. So he tried to kind of break things up or settle things. And people who were just onlookers, they said to him, what are you doing? And he said, they look like they're going to rip each other's head off. And he said, no, they're husband and wife. They're gonna argue now, and then straight away they're gonna make up in 20 minutes. Like, what's the problem? But he didn't know, right? So it's really funny that he was mentioning that point. But yeah, what we've, as we were saying before, what we've equated love is being a particular feeling. And often I love to quote one of my friends who was a doctor who said that if love was that adrenaline rush that we experience when we meet that partner for that first or second time or whatever, and we get that buzz, that drain, then if that happened every time we meet, we'd end up dying. Because
for sure.
It's too much for the body to handle. So love is a lot more than just, it has to be expressed through action and behavior. And so if a person is interested in dating, interested in expanding love, interested in knowing, is this person into me? Look at the behavior. Yeah, the words are important. Often, as you've described, one of our love languages can be words of affection or affirmation and having that validation. But it's really, really important, especially during these times where there's a lot of confusion about whether we're supposed to contact, how do we connect, how do we
often
digitally and remotely, and how often as well, and in what medium, and how we're going to solve conflicts. There's so much confusion now around. It's not so straightforward, perhaps it was in previous years. So what's the real defining characteristic would be behavior. What is this person doing physically with their body to find a way to add value to my own life? And am I also being able to add value to their life as well?
Yeah, we have a joint friend. I'm not going to name names here, but she has been married for many, many, many years, 7 kids, like one of my favorite families in the world. And she once gave me a piece of advice that has stuck with me from then onward. She says, actually, when I'm most frustrated with my husband, when I'm angry at him, when we have just had a fight, etc., I make a conscious effort to calm myself down and to then, when I least feel like it, do something nice for him, whether that is cooking his favorite meal or treating him very respectfully, etc. Because I had been complaining about how I find it really difficult when the other person behaves in a less than respectful or less than loving way, for me to then keep things up and not deflate. And she's like, you actually, especially in this case, she said, you as a woman, you can take just as much responsibility, if not more, about bringing the sweetness back into the relationship by you taking the first step, even when you least feel like it. That was a real mind boggle, but it's a really interesting thought, and it ties in perfectly with what you've just been describing.
It's a really, thank you very much for sharing that. It's really, really important that we get to churn, digest, and hear some of these incredible, positive, and encouraging messages. It's so empowering, right? That at any point, it seems really strange. Like, how do I express my love when this person's just been annoying to be or agitating? But what you've just done is you've empowered people to be able to express love no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the situation, and no matter what's happened. We can always do something for someone, even if that means sometimes loving them from a distance. And it's something that we'll definitely dive into at another point. But we can always do something for someone, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that we're gushing them with a great amount of affection. There's always something we can do to add to their mental tranquility or mental peace as well. And that's really important when it
and just keep the doors open. I think that's what it is for me that I probably didn't do in my marriage. Consequently, that ended, and obviously there's always 1,000 factors playing into that, not just one, but the keeping the door open and being willing to make the first step, that 1 or 2 or 10 times more than you actually feel like it in the moment, just because it's worth it and that person is worth it to you, even on their worst day.
Yes, and it stops us from becoming bitter. It stops us from becoming bitter. One of the great phrases that as much as possible try to live by is to become love in action. Spiritual warriors are people who love in action. And when we take, I heard TD Jakes once say that stronger or more powerful than a feeling is when you make a decision.
Okay, elaborate.
In other words, you may, like you're saying, you may feel like you don't want to connect with that person, but that feeling doesn't actually stop you from acting in a way to keep the doors open, to keep that potential connection open, and to ultimately make repair attempts. So we're starting to move towards relationships where we act quite heavily based on how we feel. But if we act based heavily on how we feel, then sometimes we'll feel like connecting, sometimes not. And that doesn't create the security, the comfort that both the masculine and feminine need in that dynamic of a relationship. Because then it means, what's the specialness? What's so special about this relationship? If it can be something that's hot and cold, or something that is full and then not, attentive and then not, involved and then not, it doesn't create the security both the masculine and feminine need to build something together.
Yeah, and it's not love. I mean, love should be unconditional in the sense that I can be all of me as a woman in all my hormonalness and all my cycle and all my good days and bad days. And likewise, even though I don't like it on the receiving end, the other person should also be able to be all of who they are, and for us to hold the space for them to express themselves, right?
Yes, 100%. And that's why it was John Gray who mentions how, and also Alan and Barbara Pease, who mention how one of the biggest insecurities in a relationship, if a relationship becomes fair weather, that when things are feeling good and nice and we feel our best, they feel their best, then we connect. And as soon as there's a conflict that arises or there's bad feelings or negativity, we disconnect. But those negativities are actually an incredible way to connect in a deeper sense. How I like to see it is like this. Let's say I have a tennis ball and I want to throw the tennis ball forward. I first have to hold my hand back in order to project it forward. And so sometimes what happens in relationships is we sometimes have to deal with a negative in order to progress forward and to come to a even higher level of collaboration, cooperation, and connection. And that can happen when there's love, as you're saying, because love is not dependent on the circumstance. This is a key thing that is important for us to understand. Love, our ability to give love, is absolutely independent of the circumstance.
Yeah.
It's independent of the person. We can always find ways to give love, even if that means giving love from a distance or just even thinking in a more wholesome manner.
Yeah, and I think just to tie into that, and that might be the last little bit to this video, is to have the humility and the willingness to really listen to what the other person is saying. Obviously, when we are ourselves giving feedback or criticizing, then doing that in the most loving, most respectful, most service-oriented way, I guess, but to really have the humility to listen as well to what the other person needs and be willing to give that, even if it's not our favorite and predominant way of giving, right?
100%, because often we're given a chance or an opportunity to choose I am right versus love. And a lot of people, they'll choose I am right instead of the love option. You see the point? And so even in my experience, what can sometimes happen is if I'm receiving feedback or even criticism in a way that's not palatable for me, I'll feel internally my body get hot. And it's like, oh, but I'll wait. Because if I say something on the moment, that means I'm acting out of the anger or the annoyance or the agitation. And so it's like a volcano erupting. So I'll wait. And we'll end up finding is that if we choose love and connection rather than just I'm right, it actually in the long term creates a sense of security, actually. Because like you were saying, you can be disposed in many different ways emotionally and in various types of psychological dispositions. But if I'm always willing to choose us versus my righteousness, it helps build an incredible foundation. Relationships, any type of relationship.
Exactly. And the us being the thing that grows between you and me by both of us contributing. I've always found that really helpful. I don't know where I read or heard this in the first place, that it's not just you and I in a relationship, that the relationship is something that happens between you and I, if I want to put that here in the screen, and I contribute to that, you contribute to that, and we are growing something together that's outside of ourselves, but that we deem worthwhile and beautiful and worthy nurturing, right?
Yes, 100%. And that's why I love when a conflict comes up to say, hey, it's not me versus you, we're in it together. It's not me versus you, we're in it together. It's us versus the problem. It's us versus the issue. It's us versus our lower selves. Let's work for it together. And you know what's good? If they're willing to work for it, great, you come to a new level of understanding. If they're not willing to work with it, that's also fantastic, because you know where you stand and you know, okay, perhaps this friendship or relationship isn't one that I should invest heavily in, and I may have to reorient myself to something else.
Good point. Thank you so much, Michael. As always, it's been really enlightening listening to you, and definitely a lot of good food for thought. We'll see you again soon. Listeners, if you have enjoyed this video, as always, you can follow our channel and ring the bell button if you like, in order to be notified when we are putting out the next little bit of content. Happy days and see you again soon.
Thank you.